Been a very exciting FIA Formula 3 season. Feels like it's just gone by quickly, like just before you know it, it's over. The races have been so much fun to watch. The Silverstone race and the Spa race in those mixed conditions. Just remember those laps back in Silverstone where half the field are on dry tyres, half the field on wet tyres, and depending on the conditions, they're all passing one another, and then the rain intensifies, the drivers on the wet tyres have the advantage, and then the rain stops, the drivers on the dry tyres have the advantage. A lot of variation in results. You don't expect that in FIA F3 as much as you do in F2 because there are no pit stops, there's no alternative strategy. Usually in F3 there's a bit more. These are the leaders, these are the midfield. This season I feel like that drivers who were in a good team last year started on the front foot. Drivers like eventual champion Leonardo Fornaroli, Gabriele Mini, Dino Beganovic, Luke Browning. I think these drivers had the momentum with them coming into the season. As the season progressed, the rookies and drivers who were on the back foot last year to an extent, like Christian Mansell or Nikola Solov, they found something, they found pace, but it was a little bit too late because there's only 10 rounds. So if it takes you 3 or 4 races to get up to speed, then you've already fallen behind. We're going to go through every driver that did more than one race. So there's 4 drivers that only did one race. I'll get to them, but I'm just going to go through it team by team and each driver. Prema is the team champions. They always are very competitive at this level. They're the favourite every season to be the team champions, and one of their drivers will be the favourite to win the championship. However, 2 years running, announced one of the Trident drivers has taken the title. It's not been since Dennis Hauger in 2021 that Prema have taken the driver's title, but they often take the team's title. They took it this year, and they were this close to taking the driver's title with Gabriele Mini. Dino Beganovic, he's a very quick driver, but this season he has so many incidents, especially in qualifying. Dino Beganovic it's very easy for him to get a lap deleted with the track limits. I'm not a fan of track limits penalties. I don't think anyone gains 5 seconds by going over a white line a couple of times. Whatever it is, he's been very up and down. He had issues that sometimes are out of his control, but his gambles in Silverstone didn't pay off. He had a very poor feature race at Spa. He didn't score any points in the races at Bahrain. He's taken 2 wins and he's finished 6th in the championship. For a driver predicted to take the title, I think he's done a very underwhelming job. I know it seems like, he's 6th in the championship. He was in with a shout for the title. Obviously, he's one of the best drivers. But, if you want to impress, if you really want to make it to Formula 1, you have to do better than Dino Beganovic has done. For Beganovic, I'll give him a 3 out of 10 for this 2024 season. Absolutely underwhelming, under par. And in my predictions video, I predicted he'd be at Prema in 2025. I'm not so sure. Maybe Rafael Kamara might take that Prema seat. I think Lindblad will be one of the drivers at Prema in F2 in 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if Rafael Kamara usurps T-Rex Beganovic. Going on to Gabriele Mini, he's had a strong season. He had a strong season last year. He fell off about the halfway point, was driving for High Tech. He's come back with Prema. He's but he's also been inconsistent. There's some really poor races from him. It was very unfortunate, I think, to get disqualified in the last race. He was very close to being the champion, so it's hard to give him a poor rating. But when you consider how fast he can be, sloppy weekends, I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. Coming to Arvid Lindblad. Now, the very interesting thing about Arvid Lindblad, he was leading the 2023 Italian Formula 4 season very convincingly, and then after the summer break, the last third of the season, he collapsed. And then interestingly, for whatever reason, Arvid Lindblad has had another collapse in 2024. He was in the conversation for a Red Bull Junior seat and after Silverstone, and he hasn't even scored a single point. He had a very bizarre crash in Hungary, hasn't scored a single point. He had a crash with Callum Voisin on the last lap of Monza, but I've got to take into consideration his age. He was 16 at the start of the year. He's probably just turned 17. So I'll give him a 6.5. I think 6.5 is the best rating. Coming to Trident. Trident are not a very strong Formula 2 team, but they're very close to, they're almost matching Prema in Formula 3. You're very lucky if you drive with Prema or Trident. Leonardo Fornaroli is in his second season with Trident. Now, I know a lot of other people commenting on F3 would say, well, he hasn't won a race, so, he's won the championship, but because he didn't give a race, I won't give him a 10. But I'm going to give Leonardo Fornaroli a 10 for his season because, as I've said, when you look at his competitors, most of them have been involved in crashes, in incidents, in all sorts of melee, and Fornaroli has scored points in all but 2 races. He's scored points in every feature race. He's got 6 feature race podiums. For me, that's what you have to do in Formula 3. To me, Formula 3 is something like, if you're not perfect, it's okay, as long as you're getting the points on the board, as long as you're fast enough. If you want to go and win a bunch of races to impress Formula 1 teams, do that in Formula 2. Formula 3 is a step you need to get through to get to Formula 2. And then doors really open for you. So I think Leonardo Fornaroli cannot do any more than he's done, scoring points in almost every race, getting all those podiums, and that last lap overtake on Christian Mansell. That's the mark of a championship mentality. When you take that risk, you take that gamble, and it pays off. However, his 2 teammates, now you have to remember, Trident is, very close to being the best team. They're not Prema, but they're almost Prema. So when I look at the results for Sami Megatunov and Santiago Ramos, it's a bit underwhelming, but Megatunov, the last race, to me, he's shot up the championship order, and he's got 2 feature race wins. But that race in Monza, that feature race, he took the feature race in Imola, but then, he's had incidents in Monaco, in Spain. Sometimes he wasn't outside the points, even though Trident is a good team. I know Formula 3 is spec series, but Trident is a good team. But getting that race win at Monza, that was incredible. He didn't start the race in pole position. He had to make his way past Alex Dunn, Christian Mansell, Fornaroli, no accidents. Just for that, I'm going to give his season a 6 out of 10. I think it's reasonable. I'm not sure that it's worth promoting him to Formula 2 just yet. I think that last race in Monza has improved his chances, improved his reputation. Coming to Santiago Ramos. Ramos to me is like Megatunov without that weekend in Monza. I'm giving him a 4 out of 10. When you're not even in the top 15 in the championship, in a Trident, when your teammates are winning races, okay, you've got a pole position, but a lot of races Ramos has had made mistakes or he's no pace. So for a Trident driver, 4 out of 10 for what he's produced this season. Coming to MP Motorsport, they're not a bad team, but they're just not really one of the top teams in Formula 3. They usually tend to be at the top of the midfield. Tim Tramnitz is the first driver here. Now, he's been very fast in the sprint races. He tends to qualify at the back of the top 12, get promoted to the sprint race front row, and he's good at converting that into a sprint race podium. Outside of the sprint races, his results are less convincing, but he's finished 9th in the championship. He's been fairly consistent, especially in the sprint race podiums. Some races he didn't have any pace. I think for Tramnitz, it's not, especially being a Red Bull junior, it's not terribly, it's very hard to impress in Formula 3. The point is there's 30 drivers, but there's only 10 points paying positions, and usually Prema and Trident, they've got 6 drivers between those two teams in the top 10. So usually if you're in MP or Campos, you're fighting, in a feature race, for example, you're fighting for 7th, 8th, 9th places. That's not the big points. So if I take that into consideration, I think Tramnitz has done fairly well. I mean, again, it's hard. There are so many drivers. This is quite amazing when you look that so many of them have only scored, points on 1 or 2 occasions. And there's a couple of them that have never scored points. It's very hard if you're not in one of those top 2 teams to regularly score points. And Tramnitz has generally had the measure of both his teammates. I'm going to give him a 6.5. He was very quick in Formula Regional European Championship last year, fighting with Stensoni and Antonelli. But this season, at least he hasn't been one of the more crash-prone drivers. Coming to Kasper Stuka, that's very disappointing from him. That's a very disappointing season. He's got 1 points finish. That's all. 1 top 10 finish out of 10 rounds, 20 races. I sort of hope that he does come back to Formula 3 for another season. Sometimes it takes a while to build the momentum in the series because you're always competing against a lot of returning drivers. I'll give him a 3 out of 10. Alex Dunn's season has been a bit up and down. At least he's scored points more often than a lot of the other drivers. He's had a couple of decent sprint races, and then I think his best weekend was Monza, which just passed. A bit like Sami Megatunov, his stature has grown because of that last race. A third in the sprint, 4th in the main race, qualifying on the front row. It's very impressive considering where he's been. But then there's other races like, Silverstone, where he caused that crash with Sophia Flörsch. So up and down, not too many big points paying positions. I'll give him a 5 out of 10. Coming to Campos, Oliver Goethe, their highest placed driver. The first 12 races of the season, he's been in the points. Had an excellent weekend at Imola. Both races he set the fastest lap. He's got a win and a second place in the feature race. He's sort of towards the back end of the points in most of the other races. He is a returning driver. He's with Campos. Campos aren't really the top team. I'll give him a 6 out of 10. He did get his promotion to Formula 2. Who knows what would have happened if he'd raced it in F3 level in Monza. That consistency is very impressive, but there's not enough really outstanding results to warrant a really high rating. As for his teammate Sebastian Montoya, let me tell you, Montoya is very fast. Sebastian Montoya has speed, but he is very incident prone. I've seen that in the last race. Had an accident with Mari Boyer. We've seen him how many times over the last 2 seasons have we seen Sebastian Montoya crashing, losing points because he had a collision. So despite some glimpses of real fast pace, I have to give Sebastian Montoya a 3 out of 10. And Mari Boyer is his teammate. He started the year very well. He was somewhat strong in the Formula Regional Middle East Championship. Came into Formula 3 with a bit of momentum. And at the start of the year, he's a regular point scorer, a lot like Ole Goethe. Ole Goethe was scoring those points. Mari Boyer was scoring the points. He gets a win, a sprint race win at his home race in Spain. And after that, his season collapses. Like Dino Beganovic, but probably even worse, he's had a lot of lap times deleted for track limits penalties. It's hard to say too much in favour of Mari Boyer. He's barely scored any points after that. He's very experienced at this level. Last year he did a double campaign of Euro Cup 3 along with FIA Formula 3. Because he got a sprint race win, I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10. If it wasn't for that sprint race win, I'd probably give him a 3 like I gave Montoya. But so much more Boyer could have done in the second half of the season, and he's just dropped the ball. Luke Browning. I have to be very hard on Luke Browning. He's got a couple of feature race wins. He was the form driver, and he's just made a series of mistakes towards the end of the season. We're talking about a GB3 champion, oldest driver in the field, older than Franco Colapinto, older than Teo Porcher. I know High Tech isn't the best team, but his car was fast. He's got a couple of feature race wins on the board. He should have been a shoe-in title for Luke Browning. You know, you got to look at the expectations. Last year's Macau Grand Prix winner. Imola, silly crash in the sprint race. A silly crash in Monza, crash in Hungary qualifying. For a driver that experienced, I'm going to give Luke Browning a 4 out of 10. And then his teammate, that was so underwhelming from Stenson. He ran Andrea Kimi Antonelli hard for the 2023 Formula Regional title. He looked really strong. He's come to Formula 3 and he's looked all at sea. He's very rarely qualified in the top 10. I feel like this was a season where if you were a rookie, it's very hard to come in. There doesn't seem to be a lot of testing mileage. There's other drivers here like Noel Leon, Alex Dunn, who you'd expect Stenson to be ahead of. You'd expect Stenson, like Tramnitz, to be attacking in the back of the top 10, biting at the heels of the more established drivers, and he's not. He's been in the midfield somewhere. The only time he looked quick was the very last race in Monza. I'm just going to give Martinez Stenson a 4 out of 10. But the other team high-tech driver, Shan Shields, is one of only 2 full-time drivers to not score a point. He looks slow all year. I don't know why, but I hope he gets another chance. But it's very underwhelming when you see how Chen Shields was driving in the Euro Formula Open Championship. It's a very poor championship with only 6 or 7 drivers. But Noel Leon came from there and he's been able to adapt. But Sheehan Shields has looked lost all season. I'll have to give him a 2 out of 10 for that. Max Esterson. No, we're coming to Genza. This was Genza's final season in Formula 3. They never looked as... Genza have looked very slow at times in the past. This season they never looked that slow. I feel like the results never came. They're always sort of stuck like in the middle of the pack or the back middle, like 17th, 18th. They're not really pushing forward. The pace seems to be there. Sometimes, Max Estenson, for example, he scored a couple of points paying results. He looked quick on occasion. He's also made some errors. He failed to finish either race in Monza. His first full-time season in FIA Formula 3, I'm going to give Max Esterson a 3 out of 10. His teammate Matthias Zagazzetta came up from Formula Regional. He's probably been a little bit more consistent. He's had to miss a race because of appendicitis. He's had a sprint race podium. There's hardly any results to show. As I say, this is a very tough championship because there's only points for 10 drivers, but there's 30 drivers. Like, even if you're finishing 12th and 13th, it doesn't amount to anything. You've got to be really special. So, giving Matthias Zagazzetta, a 3 out of 10. Charlie Wirtz, I'm going to give Charlie Wirtz a 2 out of 10. He was very quick in the Melbourne feature race when all the other rookies were struggling. Charlie Wirtz had pace. After that, he's been involved in a lot of incidents and hasn't scored any more points. So he gets a 2 out of 10. Coming to Van Amersfoort, Sophia Flörsch, she has not scored any points this season. I don't want to say that she's been terribly slow. She hasn't. She's generally been moving forward in the races. She's not qualifying in the back row every race, but considering her experience, it's quite disappointing. So I have to give Sophia Flörsch a 2 out of 10. Her teammate Noel Leon, however, now as I said, he comes from the Euro Formula Open Championship. The start of the year, he was very slow. He was at the back of the grid with Sophia Flörsch and Tommy Smith. I mean, I'm talking about Van Amersfoort now. Obviously, they're not a very strong team in Formula 3, but if you get a very good driver, they can sometimes get results. Now, Noel Leon was absolutely nowhere. And then Imola came around and he's on the podium in the sprint race. And that sort of started a run of form. And he's finished in the top 10 in the championship. For a team like Van Amersfoort, if you finish top 10 in this championship with multiple podiums, you've done an excellent job. And I'm giving Noel Leon an 8 out of 10. Even in the last weekend here in Monza that just finished, qualified poorly. And then in this feature race, he's come through the field. And with Gabriele Mini's unfortunate disqualification, he's finished 7th in the feature race. Within a few points of people like Tim Tramnitz, Sami Megatunov, drivers that have something of a reputation. And Noel Leon came in from Euro Formula Open, struggled at the start, and he's just gotten better and better and better. So can't give him less than an 8. Whereas his teammate Tommy Smith has been at the back of the grid all season. He is a former GB3 driver, so it's Silverstone in mixed conditions. He can put in a good result. He got a 4th place, but other than that, he's been very underwhelming. So I'll give Tommy Smith, just for that 4th place, a 3 out of 10. Coming to ART, they had a very tough season last year. They've retained the rookie, very young driver, Nikola Solov. They took Christian Mansell from Campos, and they've got a rookie from Formula Regional, which is Lawrence van Hoopen. All these drivers have done a very good job this season. I'm especially impressed with Christian Mansell. When you think about where this team was last year with Kalen Frederick and Gregoire Saucy, they were really struggling, and Christian Mansell's got in there, and he's been getting podiums and putting in good performances like the Hungarian feature race where he came through the field to finish 4th. Obviously he was scrapping him alongside Meni and Fornaroli in the final race in Monza. So he's been up there, especially in feature races. When you see the amount of improvement he's made since last year, you have to give Christian Mansell 7 or 8. 7.5. I'll give him an 8 because he's getting his podiums in the feature races. Lawrence Van Hoopen, I think he's done better than what his position in the championship is 13th, but you know he finished 2nd in the Hungarian feature race from pole. He's got one of those disqualifications. It's unfortunate, but with those 18 points, he's probably close to 10th place in the championship. He's been very, very consistent in the sprint races. I'm going to give Lawrence Van Hoopen a 6.5 out of 10. As for Nikola Solov, he was very slow last year, but he's very young last year, and this year, even though it's his 2nd season, he still hasn't had his 18th birthday. Started the year off fairly slowly, but then he's got 3 wins on the board. And then he got that ban from the Spa feature race. That could have helped him to get more points. So I'm going to give Solov also a 6. No, I'll give him a 7. 3 wins. Very young driver. You know, he's done a very good job. But the Monza race is where it all, he was getting so much better racer on race. He won the Hungarian feature race. He's come back in Monza and it's been dreadful. So, but considering where he was last year, it's a great improvement. 7, a little bit generous, but you know, coming to AIX, this is probably the worst team in Formula 3. They look slow, even when the drivers, especially Nikita Bedrin, can get a good qualifying position. They just seem to go backwards in the races. We saw that in Monza. Dufek and Intrafuvazak falling back through the field. As for Intrafuvazak, he's had that sprint race podium, but other than that, he's had so many incidents. He's been very slow at some races, running right at the back of the field. Just because he got a podium, I'm going to give him a 3. It's his first season in FIA F3. It's very hard series for a rookie, but the amount of errors that Intrafuvazak has made, it's a lot. As for his more experienced teammate Bedrin, difficult season. It's the worst team basically in F3. And with 30 cars on the grid, it's hard to impress. But he's been involved. Sometimes it was his fault, sometimes not. He's been involved in so many incidents. But he's also got a sprint race win. He's the only driver from AOX that got a continual trickle of points going, sometimes in the feature race. So, and I tell you what, I feel very bad if Bedrin doesn't get a promotion to F2 with AIX. If it's Niels Coolen in that car next year, that's very unfair. Bedrin's been very solid for that team. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. I have to deduct a little bit because, you know, he's had those incidents. Whereas Josh Dufek, he's honestly been slow all year. The AIX car looked stronger in Hungary all of a sudden. He's put it in the 5th on the grid and then he's lost the lap for some reason. They disqualified him from the qualifying session and it looked like he'd go the whole season pointless. And then in the very last race, he's finished 12th actually. Lindblad got a penalty and Meni was disqualified. So that's promoted him to 10th place, almost like fate, like Formula 3 saying, Josh Dufek, we value you enough to make sure you don't go pointless. But very tough season for Josh Dufek. I'm just going to give him a 3 out of 10. AOX is very tough, and Roden is the last team. They finished last in the team standing last year. This season they've done a little bit better, but they've been taking up the back row of the grid in qualifying in many races. I think Piotr Wisnicki is not one of the best drivers, but that car, I tell you, I feel sorry for Callum Voisin and Joseph Loke. These are a couple of high quality drivers. Voisin is a GP3 champion. Loke was the runner up, and they're getting beaten by Alex Dunn, who they were ahead of in the standings in GB3. I don't know why Roden is so slow in F3, and they're quite a good team in F2. They're the opposite of Trident. But Callum Voisin has shown a lot of improvement during the season, and he was on the verge of finishing in the top 10, and then Monza happened, so he scored no points at the start of the year. He's very slow, had a couple of incidents, and then Silverstone came around. He's a GB3 driver. He knows the circuit well. It's mixed wet, dry conditions. He's like, oh, I know this. He's basically won the Silverstone feature race, but he suffered a post-race penalty. He'd go on to win the Spa feature race, also in mixed conditions. He's getting all these points finishes, and then Monza happened. He's a bit slow, and then he's in the points. Somehow he finds his way into the points in the feature race. Lindblad crashes into him, and he's out in the penultimate lap. Very unfortunate. But a lot of, very strong improvement through the season. Because he's got one win taken away, and he's got a pole in Spa. So I'm going to give Callum Voisin a 7 out of 10. I think his rate of development was excellent. And, it's a shame that this series doesn't have a few more races. It would have been interesting to see how some of these drivers that were improving during the season, like Mansell, like Tramnitz, like Noel Leon, like Callum Voisin, and Nikola Solov, these drivers that are on the improve, if they'd had a few more races to try and catch up to drivers like Browning and Boganovic, then who knows what would have happened in the championship standings. They can prove themselves more. I don't know, it just feels like this championship is over almost as quickly as it started. And then we come to Callum Voisin's teammate, Piotr Wisnicki. He's a sort of certified backmarker in the series. No one expects great results from him, but a 5th place in the feature race in Silverstone, a good wet and dry race drive. So I'll give Wisnicki, and he hasn't had too many crashes, I'll give him a 3 out of 10. It's not easy to drive at Roden. Joseph Loke, very tough season for Joseph Loke. It's a shame, really. I feel like there's a lot more to come from Joseph Loke, and he can't show what he can do. But there's so many races where him and that team struggled, especially at the start of the year. But this is what I mean. When you have 30 cars, your team is not one of the best. I know it's a spec series, but if your team is not one of the best, 30 cars, it's very hard to get into the points. Unless you're in a Prema, unless you're in Trident, unless you're an experienced driver in a reasonable team, it's very hard to keep those points coming in. That's why I'm giving some of these drivers a very harsh rating. Like, Dino Boganovic, considering that he's in the Prema. I mean, what would Joseph Loke do in a Prema? He could be fighting up there in the points most races. So, so for Joseph Loke, 4. That basically sums it up. Very exciting season. As I said, over too quick. I feel like these drivers don't get enough time to, what can I say? They don't get enough time to grow, to develop. Now, there's 4 drivers did a one-off round. James Wharton stood in for Stensorn at Silverstone. He had decent pace. It was a very chaotic race, so I don't think you can fault him for not scoring points. Obviously, it's nice to score points. Noah Stromstead struggled in Monza in the Campos. If Girth had been that car, he probably would have scored points, at least in one of the races. James Headley in the Genza. Genza's not a very strong team. Headley is not a bad driver, but it's never looked like he's going to trouble the top 10. Tuukka Tarpanen's probably the most interesting of the drivers that did a one-off appearance. He looked like he might have scored points at Spa. It's very changeable conditions, but his race ended in a crash with Martinius Stenson. It's hard to give a rating to the drivers based on one round, so I haven't. Now, looking at my ratings, my season ratings for the drivers, there's only 3 drivers that have a rating of 8 or higher. I think that just reflects how difficult it is to make an impression in this series, and I'm taking into account what team the drivers are at. But Leonardo Fornaroli, he's sort of been the antithesis to all the other drivers when they've taken unnecessary risks, when they've had crashes. He's just been there calmly scoring points, getting 4th, 5th, 3rd, 2nd, getting on the podium. And then when he really needed to be aggressive in the last lap in Monza, he was, and it paid off. Now, as for drivers that might make the jump to Formula 2, I think all 3 Prema drivers should make the jump to Formula 2, but I think Dino Boganovic's very underwhelming season might affect what sort of drive he gets next year. Leonardo Fornaroli will almost certainly make it to Formula 2. Hopefully he gets a good car like an Invicta. I know he's in F3 with Trident, but someone of his quality should not be going to F2 with Trident. Lindblad will probably be in the Prema. Mini might be in a Prema. He might go to High Tech. Some of the other drivers to keep an eye on. Oliver Girth obviously is doing some rounds in Formula 2. I fully expect to see him there next year. Tramnitz, maybe. He might do another season in Formula 3. He's reasonable. Browning will probably make the step up to Formula 2. I'm not sure about some of the others. I mean, if Nikola Solov comes back to Formula 3, that's a 3rd season. I don't know if that's going to happen. He has Alpine backing. He's shown his pace. I don't know about Noel Leon. I think he might have the budget to do a Formula 2 season. He's shown a lot of promise. And Christian Mansell is the last driver I want to mention. He should definitely be on the radar for a Formula 2 drive. Hopefully he gets a decent team, because he showed 5 podiums, 4 feature race podiums. You can't. That's what you need to be doing. Behind Fornaroli, Mansell is my driver of the year. Behind Fornaroli, and I'll put Noel Leon in there. Those 3 drivers have really impressed me, and look forward to seeing them race next year in 2025.